Okay, so we'll make a start. So today we've been exploring the first of our Brahma Viharas. We've been exploring Metta. We've been exploring friendliness or loving kindness. And what we decided to do every evening on this retreat is to have a story from the life of the Buddha, just bringing out the quality of the particular Brahma Vihara that we're going to be looking at. So this story tonight is a story about metta, and the story goes right back to the time of the Buddha. In particular, it goes back to a time around about now, in terms of the passage of the year, and around about now is when the monsoon starts in India, and it rains very, very heavily for about 3 months. And right from the earliest part of the history of the Sangha, or the history of the Buddhist community, people would spend the rainy season in a retreat. So it becomes very, very difficult to move around during the rainy season, during the monsoon in India. The roads become like rivers. And so the Buddha, it's almost as if the Buddha thought, well, let's make a virtue of necessity and just spend that time in retreat. So the most famous, of course, of those retreats was when the Buddha spent those months with the five friends, five former ascetics, and he taught them the Dhamma, and they one by one became awakened. So this story takes place at around that time, and what happens initially is that there's 500 bhikkhus, and they come to the Buddha, they come to the Blessed One, and he's staying in a place called Savatthi, and Savatthi was a quite a big city, and was the seat of one of the two kingdoms that existed, one of the two main kingdoms that existed in the area where the Buddha lived. It was the kingdom of Kosala. And just outside of Savatthi was a park that was given over to the Blessed One and his disciples to stay in and to meditate and practice and so on. So they lived kind of in a park. It was probably more like what we would call a forest. It wouldn't have been very ornate or anything, I imagine. And anyway, the Buddha stayed there on the outskirts of the city, and of course, the Buddha and his disciples would go into the city for alms food, and in that way, they would be able to support themselves, but at the same time, live a kind of an independent existence as freelance wanderers. So yeah, so that's the kind of setting. And like I say, on this particular occasion, there was 500 bhikkhus, and they're about to head off into their rains retreat, and they want to take leave of the Buddha. And in particular, they want to get a particular meditation practice to do whilst they're on their rains retreat. So these 500 bhikkhus go and see the Buddha. Now, according to the text where the story comes from, the Buddha was aware of 84,000 different kinds of temperament. And he gave, anyway, and a few different temperaments are mentioned, not 84,000. But for example, for those bhikkhus, those monks who have are particularly prone to craving, he recommends the meditation, a very severe meditation on the loathsomeness of the body. Interestingly, for our retreat, for those bhikkhus who are prone to aversion, he encourages them to practice the four Brahma Viharas, so metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha. And then for the deluded bhikkhus, he encourages them to meditate on death. For the bhikkhus who have a strong devotional temperament, he recommends the recollection of the Buddha. And for those, interestingly, for those who have a discursive temperament, he recommends mindfulness of breathing and also meditating on earth. Interestingly, it just ties in with a Maitrikaya led the meditation this afternoon. So if you're discursive, the Buddha said to these particular bhikkhus, you need to meditate on the earth and the mindfulness of breathing. So what happens is that these 500 bhikkhus, they all get a particular kind of customized meditation practice from the Buddha. You can imagine if the Buddha gave you a meditation practice, you'd be inclined to take the practice of it quite seriously, because presumably the Buddha, well, the traditions, the Buddha could see the minds of others. He's very, very perceptive about other people and what it was that they needed to do in order to release their minds from the asavas, from the poisonous influxes, and thereby become arahants, become liberated ones, become awakened. So that's what happened. The Buddha gave them their meditation, and they respectfully bowed to the Buddha and they circumambulated the Buddha. That's what these ancient people would do. They'd walk around the Buddha, and then they departed. And they went north. So Savatthi is already quite a long way north in India, but they travelled even further north, and they'd walk for a while and they'd stay in a village. They'd walk for a while and they'd stay in a village and they'd beg for their food. And according to the story, at a certain point, they saw in the distance a very, very beautiful hill, a very, very even mountain in the Himalayas, and the mountain was made of a kind of blue green crystal. It was made of slabs of blue green crystal, according to the story, and they thought, well, what a wonderful place to meditate, to practice, to live. So what a wonderful vihara, a dwelling place. So they walked there, and when they got there, they also discovered that it was beautiful blue green jungle, and on the ground was sand, and the sand was like silver foil inset with pearls, and in amongst the sand were these pools of water with clear, pure water. And so they just decided to stay there. They thought, well, this is a good place to stay for the moment. They weren't sure if they're going to stay there for the whole 3 months of the rains. But anyway, they decided to stay there for a while. And they got along with their meditation very well. And the next day, they went into the local village. Now, the local village must have been quite a big village because there was 1,000 families living in the village. And there weren't many bhikkhus, there weren't many disciples of the Buddha who came that far north. So they were really delighted to have these bhikkhus meditating in the forest near to their village. They were really, really happy. And so what they did, they were so happy, they were so delighted that they entreated the bhikkhus to stay in that jungle for the whole of the rains, for the whole 3 months. And you get the impression that the bhikkhus didn't need a lot of persuading. It looked like a really, really lovely place. And furthermore, the local villagers built 500 meditation huts and provided all the things that they needed, water pots, and even the story is they even provided chairs and all the things that they would need in order to live in the jungle and get along. You can imagine, 500 people is a lot of people. Anyway, so they stayed there, and they really got into their meditation, it sounds like, and they were really blissed out. It sounds like it was just an idyllic place to practice. You can imagine that it would have been away from the extreme heat of the plains, so the Himalayas are cooler. And so there they are, they're all meditating, and they all basically blissed out. Their skin became really bright, and it says that they kind of illuminated the jungle, these bhikkhus. They were so refined, and they were so deeply absorbed in their meditation. Now, at the same time, there were these tree deities, these tree spirits. Now, they were the inhabitants of that particular jungle. Now, you've got to remember that at that time, people knew that nature was alive. So nature's still alive, but it's as if we can't see all the spirits. We can't see the different beings that live in nature. We just see the trees. But back then, there were tree spirits living in the forest, and people could actually see them and even communicate with them. So anyway, these tree spirits are there, and they're actually not entirely happy about basically being invaded by these bhikkhus. So they're kind of discommoded. They haven't got a place to stay, and they've got their children with them, and they basically think, well, if these people are going to stay here, we'll have to go somewhere else, and they don't particularly want to go somewhere else because it's a lovely place to be. So they wonder what to do, and what they decide to do is to frighten the bhikkhus. So they these tree spirits are able to assume different forms, and what they do is they assume the form of what's called a yaksha. So a yaksha is kind of like a demonic being, and they basically take these forms of these yakshas and frighten the living daylights out of the bhikkhus, so that they are not unable to retain their mindfulness. And not only that, it's not only that they're unable to retain their mindfulness, the tree spirits start emitting a foul odor, and it's so foul that the bhikkhus all start getting headaches, and they can't get on with their meditation because they've got these splitting headaches from these foul odors. So at one point, now there seemed to be in this particular grouping an elder. So you can imagine an elder bhikkhu who's been a disciple of the Buddha. Maybe he was one of the Buddha's original disciples. And he's looking around and he's thinking, what's going on here? Because these bhikkhus are not looking bright and radiant. They're looking thin and skinny, and their faces are kind of grey, and something's going on here. So interestingly, the bhikkhus didn't talk amongst themselves, though maybe they were too proud to admit that their meditation wasn't as going as well as it was, or maybe they just were sort of thinking, well, I just need to grin and bear this. I just need to get through this. But either way, the elder brother and the community was asking them what's happening, and basically they came up with a story. They said, well, when we meditate, we're assailed by these demons, and there's these terrible odors, and we get these crushing headaches, and we can't practice, we can't meditate. And so what the elder monk decided would be a good idea was to actually go back to the Buddha and ask the Buddha what to do. So this is a little bit unconventional. So, by this time the rains have started, and the idea is that you're supposed to stay where you are. You're supposed to stay put during the rains. But they decide to go and see the Buddha. Now, the Buddha's back in Savatthi, so they walk a long, 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 long way all the way down to Savatthi, and they tell the Buddha what's happened. But first of all, the Buddha says, "Well, what's going on here? You do realize that the idea is that in the rains that you stay in one place, but you're walking. So what's that about? You can imagine the Buddha being a bit puzzled by what these 500 bhikkhus are up to. But anyway, they talk to the Buddha, and they circumambulate the Buddha, and they ask the Buddha's advice. And the Buddha is said to have these, well, kind of magical powers, and he's able to see the different parts of India. And bizarrely, what the Buddha realizes, is that there's nowhere else for these 500 bhikkhus to go. There's no other dwelling place suitable for these 500 bhikkhus. He even says there's no place even for a four-legged chair. That's what he says. But slightly bizarre, but anyway. So the Buddha says, look, fellas, you're just going to have to go back where you came from. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a special protective teaching. And what the Buddha then recites is a 10-verse poem. And he says, this is to protect you. But it's not just a matter of reciting this poem, this discourse. You also have to practice it. So then the Buddha gave them this discourse, gave them this teaching, gave them this poem to remember and to recite on the 8 days of the month, where the community would come together and recite. So this is what the Buddha said. This is what should be done by one skilled in the good. Having made the breakthrough to that peaceful state, he should be able, upright, and very upright, amenable to advice and gentle without arrogance. He should be content and easily supported, of few duties and a frugal way of living, of peaceful faculties and judicious, courteous, without greed when among families. He should not do anything, however slight, because of which other wise people might criticize him. May all beings be happy and secure. May they be inwardly happy. Whatever living beings there are, whether frail or firm, without omission, those that are long or those that are large, middling, short, fine or gross, whether they are seen or unseen, whether they dwell far or near, whether they have come to be or will come to be, may all beings be inwardly happy. No one should deceive another, nor despise anyone anywhere. Because of anger and thoughts of aversion, no one should wish suffering for another. Just as a mother would protect her son, her only son, with her own life, so should one develop toward all beings a state of mind without boundaries. And toward the whole world, one should develop love and kindness, a state of mind without boundaries, above, below, and across, unconfined, without enmity, without adversaries. Whether standing, walking, sitting, or lying down, as long as one is not drowsy, one should resolve on this mindfulness. They call this a divine dwelling here. Not taking up any views, possessing good behavior, endowed with vision, having removed greed for sensual pleasures, one never comes back to the bed of a womb. So the bhikkhus heard this, the bhikkhus memorized this, and they circumambulated the Buddha, they bowed to the Buddha, and then they went back to their dwelling place on the crystal mountain with the clear pools of water and the sand like silver foil inset with pearls. And they chanted the sutra and they practiced the teaching, and the tree spirits were delighted. It says they were filled with rapture and joy, because the bhikkhus were sending them metta. The bhikkhus were aware of them and were sending them metta. And the tree spirits were delighted to live with the bhikkhus. The bhikkhus were delighted to be there with the tree spirits. And it even goes so far as to say that the tree spirits swept out the lodgings of the bhikkhus and prepared hot water for them and even massaged their feet and backs. So the tree spirits were delighted. And according to the story, they spent the rains again plunging into the depths of meditation, purifying their minds of the asavas, the poisonous influxes, and all 500 of them became awakened. And at the end of that period, at the end of the rains, there's a special ceremony called the Pavarana ceremony, when the gathered companions would all disperse to different places to practice and to communicate the Dhamma. So incidentally, that is what we celebrate Sangha Day on the full moon day in November, which corresponds to the ends of the rains in the monsoon countries. So that's where our tradition of Sangha Day comes from. And that's where the tradition of chanting the Metta Sutta comes from. It's one of the suttas which is chanted for protection. And it's also the origin of the Metta Sutta that many of us will be very, very familiar with. That's where the sutta, that's when the occasion when the sutta was taught. So I just wanted to read you a little bit, and this is what this is a couple of verses about the Pavarana ceremony, and after I've read that, I'll leave it there. So this is what it says. Actually, what we'll do after that is we'll just I'll just invite you to recite Sabbe Sata Sukhi Hontu, which is kind of like the heart of the Metta Sutta. It means may all beings be happy. Sabbe means all. Sata means being. Sabbe Sata. Sukhi means bliss, happiness, and Hontu means may it come to be. Sabbe Sata Sukhi Hontu. So I'll just read this and then I'll chant, and if you want to, you can join in, and then I'll ring a bell, and then that will be the end of this part of the evening. In this way, those skilled in the good, in the Dhamma of one who is skilled, accomplish the good that should be done, as explained by the Lord of the Dhamma. Having done this, Complete in wisdom, they made the breakthrough to the peaceful state, experiencing supreme peace of heart. Therefore, an intelligent person who wishes to dwell, having made the breakthrough to that peaceful state, the deathless, marvelous state dear to the noble ones, should constantly do the good that should be done. Stainless virtue, concentration, and wisdom. Sabe sata sukhi hontu. 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 Sabe sata sukhi